A great number of Catholics today, especially among the clergy, are confused about whether or not people who are divorced and remarried without the proper declaration of annulment should receive the Holy Eucharist at Mass. As bishops are divided about the matter, a real schism is present today in the Catholic Church. It seems that the previous unity of belief was broken and confusion and relativism reign supreme. For instance, the Bishops' Conference of Catholic Malta has given permission to give a communion to people living in adultery, in spite of the danger of sacrilege involved, as long as they feel they are in peace with God about it. It seems that the Church Tribunal is no longer required. According to them, if you are living in adultery but feel you are in peace with God, go ahead and receive the Eucharist, and do not worry about committing a sacrilege. This is called moral relativism, purely and simply. But in Poland and some countries in Africa, the bishops have forbidden it. Then we hear echoes coming from Argentina, from Germany, and other countries about this grave and growing division among bishops. This confusion is the direct result of the ambiguous teachings of Pope Francis' Apostolic Exhortation Amoris Laetitia. Cardinal Raymond Burke and the other cardinals and bishops have respectfully asked the Holy Father to clarify his teaching, but so far he has refused to do so. 12 years ago, another cardinal delivered an outstanding homily at the Mass of the Conclave that elected Benedict XVI. It was Cardinal Ratzinger himself. He addressed the conclave and said that a dictatorship of relativism is being constituted that recognizes nothing as absolute and which only leaves the I and its whims as the ultimate measure. And he said also, we should not remain as children in the faith, in the state of minors, lest we be tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine. To have a clear faith according to the creed of the Church is necessary, he emphasized. And he finished by saying that a true friendship with Christ opens us to all that is good and gives us the measure to discern between what is true and what is false, between deceit and truth. And he exhorted the cardinals present to lead the flock of Christ to the true faith. And this faith, the only faith, creates unity and takes place in charity. End of quote. Now today it seems that the opposite is happening. An atmosphere of doctrinal relativism is being imposed upon the Catholic people, and a grave moral dilemma is raised. How can priests and lay people discern between what is true and what is false, between deceit and truth regarding adultery and the Holy Communion? Here is a big question. Should priests in Malta, Germany, Argentina, and elsewhere give the Eucharist to people who publicly live in adultery, even though their bishops have given their permission? Or are those priests allowed to refuse? And if they refuse, are they disobeying the lawful authority of their bishops, who are, after all, successors of the apostles of Jesus Christ? In plain English, can one resist a wrong decision of a church authority? That's a question that many today prefer not to ask. But this is not and cannot be a matter of individual opinion. We must learn from the teachings of the Catholic Church in order to inform and form our consciences. And where do we find the answer? We find it in the Epistle of St. Paul to the Galatians, chapter 2, verse 11. St. Peter, the first pope, played a dangerous game of deceit in Antioch. There he mixed with the Gentile Christians who did not follow the law of Moses, and St. Peter ate with them. Fine. But when the Jewish Christians came from Jerusalem, St. Peter avoided mixing with the Gentiles or even eating with them, implying that they ought to obey the law of Moses. That deceit was done to please the Judaizers. It was a shameful, deceitful way of behaving by the first pope, causing scandal among the Christian community. But St. Paul, in his customary zeal, rebuked St. Peter publicly and resisted his political correctness to his face. A similar thing happened during the reign of Pope Gregory XI. A previous pope had moved the See of Peter from Rome to Avignon in France, influenced by the French kings. The risk of schism was evident, and scandal was there for all to see. Then a young nun wrote to the weakling pope, who was causing disgrace to his high office, telling him to go back to Rome. And she said, and I quote, "Be a man, Holy Father, arise. If you do not do your duty, then indeed you might have cause to fear. You know you ought to come to Rome. Then be a man and come." Unquote. And the weakling pope gathered some backbone and listened to the young nun. He returned to the See of Peter to Rome. And 85 years later, that young nun was canonized by Pope Pius II and declared a doctor of the Church by Pope Paul VI. She was the great Saint Catherine of Siena. A more recent example happened in the reign of Pope Paul VI. He had written excellent documents like the Creed of the People of God, the encyclical letter Evangelii Nuntiandi, and especially the outstanding letter Humanae Vitae. But he allowed a politically correct policy of distinction with the communist regimes of the time, which caused great scandal, because while the Church of Silence behind the Iron Curtain was suffering oppression and persecution by the Soviet regime, the Vatican diplomacy was looking the other way. A declaration of resistance to that unjust policy was issued by the great Catholic action leader of Latin America, Professor Plínio Correia de Oliveira, who inspired the Societies for the Defense of Tradition, Family and Property, TFP, in 20 countries of 5 continents. Now, to justify his resistance to the Pope's catastrophic policy, he explained that, and I quote, "Resistance is not separation, it is not a revolt, it is not acrimony, it is not irreverence. On the contrary, it is fidelity, it is union, it is love, it is submission." Resistance is the word we chose on purpose, because it is used in the Acts of the Apostles by the Holy Spirit himself to describe the attitude of St. Paul towards St. Peter. The first pope had taken disciplinary measures from the old synagogue to sustain some practices in Catholic worship. And St. Paul saw in this a grave risk of doctrinal confusion and harm for the faithful. He then stood up against St. Peter and resisted him to his face. That's in Galatians chapter 2, verse 11. In this zealous and inspired action of the apostle of the Gentiles, St. Peter did not see an act of rebellion, but rather one of union and fraternal love. And knowing well in what he was infallible and in what he was not, St. Peter ceded to the arguments of St. Paul. Now, the saints are models for Catholics. Thus, in the sense in which St. Paul resisted, our status is one of resistance. And with this, our conscience is at peace, unquote. Now, let's apply these examples to today's conflict. Here I specifically address Catholic priests who have the duty to work for the salvation of their parishioners. Suppose that your bishop gives permission to give communion to people living in adultery, in the context of the ambiguities brought about by Amoris Laetitia. You know that this is forbidden by 2,000 years of consistent church teaching, from the chapter 11 of the second epistle of St. Paul to the Corinthians, to Familiaris Consortio of John Paul II, and Sacramentum Caritatis of Benedict XVI. And even the Code of Canon Law, Canon 195, forbids it. So your well-informed conscience tells you not to give communion to people who live in adultery. Now I ask you a question. Are you obliged to go against your well-informed conscience to obey your bishop? Or do you have the right to resist your bishop's instruction? In plain English, can you question your bishop? Let's see what the great Catholic theologians have to say about it. I will quote from 5 of the best, 2 Dominicans and 3 Jesuits. The first one is the angelic doctor, St. Thomas Aquinas. He teaches that, and I quote, "There being an imminent danger for the faith, bishops must be questioned, even publicly, by their subjects." Thus, St. Paul, who was a subject of St. Peter, questioned him publicly on account of an imminent danger of scandal in a matter of faith. And as St. Augustine teaches, St. Peter himself gave the example to those who govern, so that if sometime they stray from the right way, they will not reject a correction as unworthy, even if it comes from their subjects. Unquote. Yes, St. Thomas Aquinas affirms that the faithful have the right and the duty to resist teachings that contradict the previous magisterium. Still, on the same instance, when St. Paul opposed St. Peter publicly, St. Thomas teaches, quote, "The reprehension was just and useful, and the reason for it was not trivial. There was a danger for the preservation of the evangelical truth. The way it took place was appropriate, since it was public and open. For this reason, St. Paul writes, 'I spoke to Cephas,' that is Peter, 'before everyone,' because the simulation practiced by St. Peter was fraught with a danger to everyone." Unquote. The angelic doctor also shows how this passage of the scriptures contains teachings not only for bishops, but for the faithful as well. Quote, "To the bishops an example of humility was given, so that they do not refuse to accept corrections from their inferiors and subjects. And to the subjects an example of zeal and liberty, so that they will not fear to correct their bishops, above all when the crime is public and entails a danger for many." Unquote. Elsewhere, St. Thomas teaches that it is a work of mercy to respectfully correct a bishop who sins. He quotes Ecclesiasticus 17:12 and says that God imposed on each one duties toward his neighbor. Now, a bishop is our neighbor. Therefore, we must correct him when he sins. Some say that fraternal correction does not extend to bishops, either because a man should not raise his voice against heaven, or because bishops are easily scandalized if they are corrected by their subjects. However, this is not the case here, since when the bishops sin, they do not represent heaven, and therefore must be corrected. And those who correct them charitably do not raise their voices against heaven, but in their favor, since the admonishment is for their own sake. For this reason, the precept of fraternal correction extends also to bishops, so that they may be corrected by their subjects. Unquote. Okay, this lawful resistance is applied to bishops, but the Pope is also a bishop. Can a faithful Catholic also resist a wrong decision by the Pope? The great theologian, Dominican, Father Francisco de Vitoria, asked these questions. Quote, "What should be done when the Pope, because of his bad customs, destroys the Church? What should be done if the Pope wanted, without reason, to abrogate positive law?" And his answer is this: he would certainly sin. He should neither be permitted to act in such fashion, nor be obeyed in what was evil, but he should be resisted with a courteous reprehension. Consequently, if the Pope wanted to destroy the Church or the like, he should not be permitted to act in that fashion, but one would be obliged to resist him. The reason for this is that he, the Pope, does not have the power to destroy. Therefore, if there is evidence that he is doing so, it is lawful to resist him. The result is that if the Pope destroys the Church by his commands and his actions, he can be resisted and the execution of his commands prevented. unquote. Another great theologian, a Jesuit, Father Francisco Suarez, also defends this teaching. Quote, if the Pope gives an order contrary to good customs, he should not be obeyed. If he attempts to do something manifestly opposed to justice and the common good, it would be lawful to resist him. If he attacks by force, he could be repelled by force, with the moderation appropriate to a just defense. Unquote. Another great Jesuit, St. Robert Bellarmine, a doctor of the Church, the outstanding paladin of the Counter-Reformation, he teaches, quote, just as it is lawful to resist a pontiff that attacks the body, it is also lawful to resist one who attacks the soul or who disturbs civil order, or above all, one who attempts to destroy the Church. I say that it is lawful to resist him by not doing what he commands and preventing his will from being executed. It is not lawful, however, to judge, punish, or depose him, since these are actions proper to a superior, unquote. Another great Jesuit, Father Cornelius a Lapide, teaches that, quote, superiors can, with humble charity, be admonished by their inferiors in the defense of truth. That is what St. Augustine, St. Cyprian, St. Gregory, St. Thomas, and others declare about this passage of Galatians 2:11. Unquote. So the duty to resist, applying these teachings to our days, the conclusion is very grave and very simple. According to the best Catholic theologians, those Catholics who truly love the Church have the right and the duty to resist the teachings, the laws, the norms, the commands coming from any ecclesiastical authority, be he a priest, bishop, cardinal, or even the Pope, if it is evidently harmful to faith and morals. Such resistance should be courteous and charitable, and in so doing, a Catholic is not judging the authority, because to resist a wrong command is not to judge, it is to obey God rather than man. If you wish to know more about this issue and receive all these quotations I mentioned here in this presentation, please send an email and you will receive a PDF file with all the sources. Let us make a special effort to increase our prayers and our sacrifices to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, so that soon the Immaculate Heart of Mary may triumph, as she promised in Fatima. And an unambiguous clarity of the teaching on this issue will be provided by the Holy Father for the greater glory of God and salvation of souls. And let us also increase our devotion to St. Michael the Archangel, asking him to expel from the Church that smoke of Satan that Pope Paul VI denounced 45 years ago, precisely on the feast day of St. Peter and St. Paul. I'm Raymond de Souza. God bless you.